And so we were watching a TV show to just pass the time. And as we were watching this TV show, one of the characters in the television show said, "Don't worry," as part of a sentence. And the TV paused and the closed captioning came on and it just simply flashed, "Don't worry." And it went off and it flashed again. And all of us watching were kind of just motionless and in shock.
Yes, and many children see them too. About 75% of the world's children today are being born with etheric vision. And when your children talk with people and have daydream playmates, the chances are they are actually speaking to some of these people. Because these angels or angelic forces or nature spirits, as they're often called, will often make themselves seen.
And all of a sudden I hear him go, "Whoa," or, something like that. So I look up. And as I look up, I see this thing.
And I said, "I've never seen a butterfly like you before."
I know that the paranormal is real. Listen.
As soon as I spoke to it, it turns around and makes eye contact with me. And then it stands upright.
And it was at that moment that I saw it was like an orange light appear above this row of trees. And from this sort of orange light, this thing appeared. Its wings were actually like sycamore leaf shaped.
And I started talking to them. I'm like, "Hi, are y'all the dwarves?" And I would hear whispers that would say, "Hi, yeah, you want to play?" And it wasn't just my imagination. And I had told them, I'm like, "My dwarves, they like beer, And my dad's like, "Yeah, sure, your dwarves like beer." And they were holding a conversation, and his beer slid upwards instead of downwards, how the house was tilted. And him and my brothers jumped up.
So I stopped calling out Adam, and I'm just my mind draws a blank, and I stop behind that tree stump. I'm pretty close to it now because I took a few steps forward, and I see this thing.
Welcome everybody tonight to Fascinating Fae. Tonight, we're traveling to British Columbia to talk with Blake. Blake, how are things going in BC tonight?
Going great, James. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. I really appreciate you making the time. So Blake, here on Fascinating Fae, as you know a little bit about, because you are my friend, I talk to people that have had incredible experiences with the Fae, with sort of the paranormal, for lack of a better word. But essentially, I just talk with people that have had incredible, very difficult to describe experiences. And one of the things that I do here on the show, at the top of each show, so I'll just do this right here now with you, is I set a few ground rules for these conversations. The first rule is that we are not here to convince anybody of anything. There's no emphasis on convincing that this has happened. This is just about collecting the stories firsthand that have happened. The second thing is that I do think it's brave to come on the show. So I tell everybody, I think you're brave for being here, and thank you for being here. And then really the only other thing I like to say is that for the most part, I don't like to interrupt my guests, and I just would like you to, as much as possible, with a few prompts from me, tell your stories, no rush, lots of detail, lots of context, so that the way that it makes sense to you is something that, resonates and communicates to the audience listening so that they can also understand why something was meaningful, why something, is important, that sort of thing. And so those are pretty much the ground rules for Fascinating Fae episodes. But just before I go any further, I think it is worth mentioning that most people that I talk to are strangers or people that I've never spoken to before. But in this case, tonight, Blake, our guest, is a good friend of mine. And I think that it's interesting to talk to you about a couple of things that we've experienced together, because I have talked about some of those things in part on Fascinating Fae previously, but I don't want to be, the guy always telling my own fairy story. But in the case of Blake here, my friend tonight, for the audience listening, we've got a unique opportunity to almost get like a second set of eyes on some of the experiences that I've shared with you in the show, coming from a totally different perspective. So I'm really excited for that reason to be able to talk with you here tonight, Blake.
Great, me too.
Thanks, man. I do really appreciate, again, that you're willing to kind of put yourself out there a little bit and do this, because it's not comfortable to know that, you're doing it in a public setting. Most of the time, these stories are pretty private. Mm-hmm. So there's maybe 3 or 4 key experiences that I'd like to cover with you, but let's sort of ease into it slowly. One of the first things I'd like to sort of ask you about, and this is something that you and I know, but everyone else listening doesn't know. Can you tell people about what happens with my phone whenever you and I get together?
Yeah, absolutely. This is probably one of the first things that started to happen between you and I, that always kind of caught us in this, how is this happening again type of situation. But we would often be walking in the woods or just hanging out together, talking about whatever it was we were talking about. And I feel like in those days, it was often about great ideas for the future, things that we could take action on and do, things that we were actively doing at the moment towards a better future for people, sort of upful things. And your phone would come on with, it would always be roots reggae, and usually really hitting songs. Like I know Clinton Fearon popped on a couple of times with some key words of positivity and positive rebellion, and would stand out to me of like resist the oppression type of themes. And it happened enough times that it basically became a comical occurrence. That's how I would describe it.
I remember the last time, like maybe the 4th or 5th time that it happened, was we were up at the convention for Pasha Brands, and that was the day that Safa gave us that giant bag of weed. Do you remember?
Yeah.
And we were we're already in a remote-ish kind of area with low cell phone reception. And so you and I are like, okay, well, let's go for a walk and smoke this. And we were walking down this trail, down. And we're talking. And then in that time, it was Steel Pulse came on with I Want to Live in Your House. And I just looked at you and you're like, what? And I'm like, what? I pull out my phone, no service. And this is the thing too, I think every time it happened, we were out of service, no cell phone service, no Wi-Fi.
Often, right? Yeah.
I don't have Spotify Premium, and how Spotify started playing in my pocket and with no connection to the network. And because I don't have Spotify Premium, I don't have any saved and downloaded songs. It does not make any sense. How is this phone having music on it right now? Number one.
Right. And it was Steel Pulse. He was there's the roots reggae band that's missing. It's comical, man.
It's been really weird. And I think like more than once we were actively smoking and, like you said, talking about the future, because as my friend, you're one of the friends I really value the most, because I kind of share that kindredness with you of feeling like some responsibility for the planet and some desire to take action to support it. Which, you know, again, just for the audience listening, it might sound a little bit pedestrian, but over the course of several years, I see Blake infrequently, you know, face to face. And just about every time that we've gotten together and gone off into the woods to go smoking, my phone has started playing reggae music at a key moment, you know, and often like starting the song, not at the beginning, but in the middle.
Yeah.
And like words coming out of the phone at that moment because the song is playing that are complementary or affirmative to the things that we are talking about. And all of this started to happen like before I ever actually saw my ferry in 2019. And before I even bought the boat that I saw the ferry on. So, you know, at the time I thought, wow, this is like really cool, but I didn't associate it at the time with anything beyond just a fluke or a coincidence until it started happening every time. I think maybe one time there's an exception where it didn't happen. And that is a really, truly weird thing to contemplate. Like, how is that all taking place? I don't know.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so thanks for just confirming that did happen, because it's one of my favorite memories of hanging out with you is that these reggae songs just start to play. And I remember when I talked to you just before I left for Costa Rica, you came over and I asked you, why do you think that happens for you and I? And you had the greatest answer, which I don't know if you remember, but you said, because reggae is the music of rebellion and love.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And so, you know, rebellion and love might not seem like they go hand in hand, but in my world, they certainly do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, kind of moving along just to something a little bit more in line with this idea that when Blake and I get together, strange and wonderful things happen. Blake, on the show, I've talked pretty often about my boat, my art boat, seeing a ferry on the boat with but you and I have a very special moment aboard that boat as well. If you could, just tell everybody about the day that the painting was finished and we launched that boat together.
Absolutely. Yeah, wow. That boat, I feel too, it's worth mentioning. Like, I remember that boat coming into your life from the moment you didn't have it. You were just kind of looking at it. Again, we were having a session outdoors at that very sacred site in the Gorge Waterway, the 4,200-year-old midden. And it was at that location where we were just in the attitude of awe of how old and ancient and powerful this place was that we were. And you were in the midst of kind of making this decision about this boat. I think you might have even phoned the guy and talked to him while we were there and kind of hammered down, like, I'm going to come and take a look at this thing. So in my mind, in my observation, I was there when you were starting to think about getting it. And then the next conversations were like you had it and you were getting the mural painted on the side of it. And so for me, there's this buildup of like, oh man, I'm going to get on the boat one day. It's going to happen. And so you phoned from, I think you were parked in Cobble Hill, Mill Bay, somewhere in there. Is that where you launched? And so it was going to happen, or going to get in this boat. So I got down to, I'm not sure how I got down there, if you picked me up and we drove. I don't remember that part, but we got in the boat. All of the workings were done to make the boat go. I'm still in that like excited kid energy of like, holy, look at James, he's fucking did it. He's got this boat ready to go. It's looking sharp. And I'm a fairly inexperienced boat person. So I definitely was happy that you were captaining that thing and knew what you're doing. And I believe we launched and we were free of the pier. And when we were doing that, we were quite focused on the dock and the maneuverability, and very close. We were focused close. And so as soon as we were free, we looked out to the ocean, and the very first thing that we saw was the dorsal fins of a pod of orcas. To the point that we were like, is that is that really orcas out there? It was that bewildering, really, that is the very first thing that we saw. And so I do remember a moment of almost indecision. It was like, what do we do? Because those orcas were being essentially pursued by three whale watching boats, which we sort of noticed second. We saw the dorsal fins, and then sadly, we noticed they're being followed by all these whale watching boats, and we feel a type of way about that. So it was this moment of like, do we just take the boat right out there, and what do we do? And I know that what we basically did is we just went out and observed the whale watching industry, essentially move those orcas along and out of the inlet. And I'll never forget the timing of that. And that's my perspective on that boat, on that launch day. And I also would add to one of the things that happened I feel like it happened within a couple of weeks, if not days. You parked the boat in Brettonwood, in the Saanich Inlet, in a tight, like tucked in there too, in a spot that's not very normal for people that see orcas. And the orcas came by and checked your boat out very, very soon after that. Which one of your boat neighbors told you and took pictures. And then, of course, the community was like, oh, the orcas, they came all the way in the inlet, right up into almost Sneakwith, the ancient village site there. And just hearing that, too, for me, when I heard that, it was wonderful news, but it wasn't even shocking. I was like, of course they did. They had to get a closer look at that picture because your picture was very accurate. I believe the artist did a very, very accurate job of all the shapes of the dorsal fins. And so the creation of art there, the visual, was being appreciated by the whales, which is something special. And I think both of those instances were affirming to, the love-based rebellion that you were launching there. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Do you remember? I started going like, they're here, and
yeah, that's exactly what you said.
And actually, there's a little video I think that you took or I took on my phone, and I'll find it and try to add it into this episode. But you can hear the childlike excitement in my voice, like,
absolutely.
Oh my God.
Absolutely, yeah, we got it. I'm sure we had our phones out to record, so we should find that for sure. It was a magical moment indeed.
And for the audience listening, just for some context, if you're new to Fascinating Fae and you're listening here to season 2 for the first time, basically what happened is that I used the financial success that I had achieved through my cannabis work to then further my other passions, which largely surround, animal rights and ocean health and awareness. Orca whales in British Columbia are critically endangered. There's really only like 70 plus of them left. And big part of the reason that there's so few is that many Salish orcas were stolen from the ocean and brought to marine parks all over the world to perform in slavery for, like, you know, marine land and sea land and places like that. And the painting on the boat, the whole purpose of the boat was to humiliate, shame, confront the whale watching industry in our province that was continuing the exploitation of these animals. And when we backed out of that marina in Mill Bay, we backed out, the boat sort of turned now to point forward, and I heard this big thump. I don't know if you remember that. And I thought, oh, fuck, I've hit something. And so I said, you know, sort of stay here at the wheel. And I went and I looked over the edge. And when I looked over the edge, I just caught it when I looked over another bump. And what it was a salmon, a full-size salmon, jumping out of the water and hitting the side of the boat. Fucking unbelievable. And immediately pursued right behind it by this pod of orcas. That's right. Yeah. And they were, I mean, because when I was backing out, I was checking the rear to make sure there's nothing and no one behind me as I pulled this 75-foot monster off the dock. Yeah. I get it pointed straight and I hear boom. And I thought, oh my God, my first moment out in the boat, I've already fucked it up. And I went outside the wheelhouse and I peered over the front edge of the bow, and that's when I saw the second salmon hit the side of the boat, and directly behind it was that big 6-foot tall dorsal fin from the male orca leading the pod. And I was like, oh my God, they're here. And then fairly quickly, but not directly afterwards, is when the whale watching boats came in. Yeah. Which, for those listening that might not have some context here, there's a valuable part of this that needs to be understood, which is that orca whales in Sanish Inlet, Brentwood Bay, are basically unheard of at this time. And the salmon population in this part of the inlet and bay is non-existent. So the idea that you would see an entire pod of orcas and a jumping salmon that deep down into Saanich Inlet, it doesn't make any sense. It's not a biological pattern that is common whatsoever. Mm-hmm. So, you know, the feeling that I had anyway was that they were coming to welcome the launch of the boat, like a jubilee kind of thing. You know, it was
100%. Yeah.
And, you know, it's true. You reminded me that we were sitting at the midden, and I was sort of saying, okay, Blake, like I've, you know, I got this check, like I'm finally clear of being a marijuana seller. What do I do next? And you and I were having a conversation about that at this very sacred spot. And that is exactly when I was on like Craigslist and I saw this boat.
Yeah.
And I remember too, we were watching a heron fish in the little pool. I don't know if you remember that.
I do remember that, yeah.
And we watched this heron like stand totally still and pluck maybe 10, 12 fish from this little pool. Also a very sacred, you know, visitor at that moment. But yeah, I mean, a lot of things obviously about this podcast can be directly tied to my experience aboard that boat with Mrs. X in 2019. But before any of that happened, you were there in that origin space and time. And you were there very specifically with me the very first day that all the artwork was complete and that the mission was about to begin. The mission being to, you know, chase down and harass whale watchers, just like they're chasing down and harassing the whales. And yeah, off we pull from the dock, and then this incredible experience. I had lived on my float house in Brentwood Bay for 7 years prior to that.
And never seen orcas, right?
Never seen an orca once, not even close. Like, no. And so for them to come deep down into that bay, specifically and directly timed with when I'm pulling off the dock, is beyond chance. And it's not even taking place in a place where that could normally happen based on chance. This was just something else entirely.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm right that a few days later, once you were parked, your neighbors sent a picture of the orcas visiting your boat.
They came again, and that was a separate pod. And so
this is what I thought I remember. It was so a separate pod. How did that happen? Like one pod told the other, like, you got to go check out this beautiful artwork. And just correct me if I'm wrong. Who was painted on your boat? Wasn't it? Like, was there a chance that there was like an ancestor on?
It was
that
the family. Yeah. Like the oldest known living orca was Granny at 110. She and Ocean Sun, who are like, so each of these orcas have names for everyone listening who's not familiar with the coast. And there's like a maternal matriarchal society that's led by women. And so on the side of the boat, I had accurately depicted 20 plus of the stolen orcas that had been pulled out of the water and died in these marine parks. And at the very front edge of it, I had Granny, who is the oldest living matriarch. She had since passed, but she's sort of like the figurehead that everyone knows and loves here on the coast. On the one side, on the port side, and then on the starboard side, I had Ocean Sun, who is the mother of Tokatai, the whale that I was most focused on living in Miami Seaquarium. Yeah. And so along the side of the boat was basically full-size, accurate depictions, dorsal fin nicks and dorsal fin shapes, like accurately depicted of all of the living and deceased matrilineal leaders of the pods.
Yeah.
And so, did one pod say to the other, you have to come and see this? If you ask me, the answer is yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And did the orcas know that I was launching after this immense amount of effort and time focused on them and they wanted to be there for it? I think, again, I would say yes, absolutely. Like somehow through space and time, they knew that that was the moment I was backing off that dock. Exactly. And they were there for that.
Yeah. And their communication amongst pods could have been different than I think we traditionally think of communication, possibly. May have been vocal. Could have been something else, though. You know what I mean? I don't know how often the two pods pass one another, but I love that there's a little bit of unknowns there.
It's truly a mystery. And, if you talk to enough people that have done meaningful work with orcas, each and every one of them will have a story similar to this one that we're telling, where somehow, without really any logic, the pod just appears to show up at a key moment, and not having the orcas were being followed all day up the coast and then they eventually got to me. It's more like someone is out at a specific spot, not known for orcas or not in the season of orcas or something like that, and then all of a sudden they're just there. Almost seeming as though the orcas have traveled immense distances of space and time instantaneously to all appear, in effect, in this place in a key moment. And, I'm just paraphrasing, but I did speak to dozens of people for my earlier work associated with the orcas, and they've all told me similar things, which, for the purposes of this show, Fascinating Fae, I'll just leave this question for the audience to ponder. Is it possible that the megafauna of the planet, these charismatic large animals like elephants, whales, are they more Fae than not?
Yeah.
And, I don't know, but I do know that when we think about how to restore our planet, it can often feel like it's only a matter of hard sciences. Like you have to plant this tree and you have to wait for it to grow and then this ecosystem can restore. What I experience with that orca pod and those salmon seems to suggest that both the salmon and the orca can in effect materialize out of nothing, and that the nature of reality is perhaps much less physical in its entirety, and maybe there's a little bit more magic, for lack of a better word, available to the toolkit for those trying to restore our natural world.
Right.
I think you and I have even, in a couple of sessions, thought to ourselves, like, yeah, what does that really mean that they could do that? Like, what would happen if everybody was focused on orcas and salmon and doing, art and other things to show their appreciation and love? Would that possibly mean that there are all of a sudden many, many, many more orcas and salmon? Like, is that the recipe? Is that how it actually works? I don't know. The materialist view of the world is that you have to wait for an orca to be born and grow old, and there's no such thing as a spontaneously materializing animal. However, our experience aboard that boat suggests otherwise. Not just from like we're projecting, but it really felt like something incredibly special was taking place. And so, I think that's enough of just like you and I and going back, because although those stories are interesting, the main reason I was really hoping to talk to you tonight is your story about what took place with Laura. And so what I'll do here is I'll just kind of now take a total backseat. I'm not here in any way to kind of involve myself, because this is your story coming up next. So thanks for talking with me a bit back and forth, but if it's okay with you, I'd like to now just kind of hand you the mic entirely to talk about this experience that you had with your partner, the passing, and then what happened after. Because when I heard this from you, was absolutely, enthralled, and I thought, this is such a powerful emotional story, but it also, in my work here at Fascinating Fae, really does follow a lot of the patterns and trends, or whatever you want to call it, from other people's experiences with the other side, so to speak. So how I think we can best do this is, if you would start, and if you're feeling comfortable with it, just tell everybody, who Laura was to you, and then just walk us into what happened, including, the stuff that happened involving her loss, and then what happened afterwards, if you'd be so kind.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks, James, for that opportunity to speak to this experience, for sure. I do believe this experience happened to me beforehand, so in some ways, I mean, it helps both of the things we've already talked about make more sense, or just feel more sense to me, with regard to the spirit realm, the other realms, and the interaction that sometimes happens into our realm. Laura was my partner when I was a younger person, in my early 20s. We were together for a number of years, and planning futures together, and very passionate individual who pursued their dreams, and would speak, at times when we spoke about passing, would be someone who would say, well, when I pass, I'm gonna try my best to just really go with the adventure of whatever it is that happens there, curiosity of, and even making statements of, well, when I pass, this is what I'll try to do, type of person. And as it went, they were on a journey on the ocean, avid sailor, and an accident happened, and they were washed overboard, and presumed to be missing and in need of rescue. So it happened at nighttime, and the boat was doing the best it could to search, and Coast Guard got called in, and was very, very, very far off into the Atlantic Ocean. And so what ended up happening was, people were waiting, essentially hopeful. We were being very hopeful and waiting for rescue. And in the course of time, on about the second day, I flew from where I was to be with their family. And so I was with all of the people that loved her the most. And we were just being together, eating together, passing the time together, comforting each other. And I feel like the story around that really began probably on the fourth day. One of the siblings of Laura's came to me and said, last night I dreamed that Laura's passed and she is in a good place. Laura wants us to not worry. And so I held that dream story close to me that day. I mean, we were already on day 4. And the family we were still hopeful in that rescue was still ongoing. Rescue attempts were still ongoing. And so we were watching a TV show to just pass the time. And as we were watching this TV show, one of the characters in the television show said, "Don't worry," as part of a sentence. And the TV paused and the closed captioning came on and it just simply flashed, "Don't worry." And it went off and it flashed again. And all of us watching were kind of just motionless and in shock. Partly because we had heard the story in the morning of the dream had by a sibling, and the matching of the words and the messaging blinking. I mean, it was just a lot to take in as to how did that happen? How did that occur at that time? What are the chances of the TV glitching like that? And then the TV, before we could go and try and fix the problem, it just started, the show continued. It just went back. So I don't know how much longer the next thing happened, but I think it was within the next hour. The show was probably finished, and we were sitting around the table, and on their wall was one of these kind of prank rubber fish, and it randomly turned on out of nowhere, and this fish like bent so that it comes off of the stand on the wall. The head sort of turns towards you and the mouth starts moving, and it sang the song "Don't Worry, Be Happy." And it did the whole, like, whatever electronic signal triggered it, it went on and it did its whole thing. And some of the family members at that point, were overcome with emotion because it was a second very specific coincidence repeating the same message of "don't worry." So in the briefest telling of that story, that is the essence of what happened that day, and will always stand out in my mind, as it seems as though Laura's spirit in that realm was able to do something that relates to electronics being manipulated by something in that realm. And I just use the word something because it's, in quotations, unexplainable, but it's also obviously something that can happen. And so the reason I said at the beginning is, when the reggae comes on with you and I, there's a part of me that's not shocked at all. It's like spirit realm is somehow able to interact with electronics and signals, and obviously there's logic there applied to and timing, which is fascinating to me. So absolutely fascinating to me. And so that would be my main words about that, James.
Thank you, Blake, for sharing that. And I'm right there with you, man. What is the background understanding? Like, is the spirit world able to see like what we're doing currently? Is there like, how do they time that stuff so perfectly? Is really an important part of this, because the different hypotheses that you could put forward are all totally unsatisfying, but yet at the same time very compelling. Like the one hand, you could say, okay, like if you pass, you enter another kind of stage of life, for lack of a better word, because this doesn't seem like the universe is trying to send a message. It seems like Laura is trying to send a message, especially with this story about the dream, the television, and then I think the thing is called a Billy the Bass.
Billy the Bass, I think it is. Yeah, if you could buy it at San Francisco back in the 90s,
Yeah,
the San Francisco
I remember
gimmick
it well.
stores. Yeah,
it's like a funny fish that sings
Don't
songs
worry.
when
happy.
you wave the motion detector or whatever.
This one just had a red button that you had to put. You had to physically push it for it to come on. So it was just like nobody stood up and pushed it. It just came on.
Yeah, and so like, and again, I never want to be insensitive, but does that mean that Laura's spirit was the one doing those manipulations? Is sort of where my mind immediately goes.
Yeah, absolutely.
What does that tell us about the nature of reality, the nature of life after death, the nature of life itself when you're living it? Is totally a trip, because where do these influences from the other side start and stop is really hard to put your finger on.
Right.
And although not related, you're right. Like when the music starts playing with you and I out of cell phone service through an app that doesn't have anything downloaded or saved, how is that happening? How is a broadcast television show pausing, the closed captioning coming on, staying stuck until you all read the message in addition to hearing it, and then moving on, is really interesting? Because like if you think about, okay, the spirit of Laura, or any, in maybe some cases with some of my guests, a fairy, maybe in some cases with some of my guests, a departed loved one like you, how do they know what's on the TV? How do they know what's about to be said? How do they know to time it, to pause right then and there? Really starts to ask bigger questions about the nature of reality, for me anyway.
Yeah, I've spent a decent amount of time thinking about it. I'm asking, elders, people with more wisdom than me, their thoughts, people I trust. And some of the things that I've sort of thought about and that have bring me comfort in terms of losing other people, and also in just facing in the future some form of transition upon leaving this body, is that some teachings teach that there is a transitionary period for our spirit. Back home in the prairies, I know a lot of Nehiyaw Cree people, Métis people who are living traditionally and practicing tradition will burn a fire for 4 days, and the responsibility of someone to make that fire go and be burning the whole time. And anybody who's feeling feelings and feeling strong emotions, that's a really good place for them to come and gather. And after the 4th day, if done right, all the things that needed to be done for that spirit to transition, are done. And I've always kind of, in my mind, if we relate back to the story I just told you, is it was around the 4th day that we got strong messaging and it seemed important that none of us sit there and worry. So part of me wonders if Laura, got to do what she spoke of, which was fly around and try and do stuff when this transition is happening, but then perhaps got to a point where she was like, that's cool, I did that, and I need to transition. So perhaps it speaks to the living people. We have to do our work too to help them go. And other traditions that I've heard that make a lot of sense to me is when a family member passes in some cultures here in the Coast Salish territory, is the descendants of that person make sure to shut all your windows and get inside your house by nighttime, because little kids could get quite scared by getting a visit from an ancestor who's in passing. And that's like a 4-day marker. So sometimes I like to find comfort and wisdom from old teachings, and I'm not saying that that's exactly how it goes, but I like to think that there is a transitionary period, and perhaps that's what we witnessed that day in the story I just shared. And I would like to share one other story, because it's just coming strong to my mind right now while we're talking about this, that we just talked about electronics being affected. This is different than that. So I lived in California for off and on for 10 years with my family, and one of the neighbors that we had while we lived there was a very strong integrity type of old school guy. His name was John. He believed in working hard and treating people kind and not being judgmental, and he really lived by some good values. He was an old World War II veteran, and he took a strong liking to our family, particularly my dad and my brother. And because he was a neighbor, we would see John, once every couple of weeks. He would just come over, we'd have coffee or tea and talk. And he always reminded us of this one oak tree in the driveway that was unsafe. He was like, when are you going to cut down that tree? It's not safe. It's going to fall down one day and hurt somebody. And it was a right massive old oak tree, and you could see it had rot in it. So it became a thing. He would talk about it every single time he came. And it was half a joke, but half you should do that. Well, John passed away, and the night that he passed away, there was not a storm. It was like a calm day. The tree, it didn't exactly explode, but it kind of did. The rot part just popped, and the big old tree fell over. And our family was just like, what are the chances of that? That is so, the chances of it are so crazy, because that tree lived for hundreds of years. And that human had a connection to it. It was directly across the property line from his house. So he looked at it every day, right? And I was like, that might be another example of old John passed, and he found himself in a transitionary space, and he was like, that fucking tree, I'm gonna go see if I can affect it. And maybe it was a little electronic spark you just need to put in there. I don't know, right? I'm humorously musing about what happened, but there's a strong part of me that believes, I guess, I want to say knows, that John's spirit in passing had some effect. So I had to share that because it totally relates. And, I have a big smile on my face right now because this helps me think about the future. We all have to go through death. And I think that the way you look at death will totally affect how, if it's a scary experience for you, or it can almost be a playful and fun one. You know what I'm saying? And it could be an adventure of closure. I don't know. I'm musing now, but musing is good, right?
Musing is really good because, as I often say on the show, no one knows, and no one knows for sure. And actually, the mystery of it all is a part of the gift of it. It was a big part of the gift of it, because it does leave questions. But the questions, whenever you attempt to answer them, take you to a happy place, not a scary place, not a sad place. And I know that when just before I left here for Costa Rica and we got together, we had a similar conversation to this one. And I think the reason that you originally shared the Laura story with me is I was telling you a similar story first about DK and and the wedding where DK was part of a band called Mindle Beach Markets, 5 guys, lifetime friends from the Sunshine Coast. And several years after DK passed, one of the guys in the band was getting married to his longtime sweetheart. This is Matt and Mel. And so at this wedding, it was the reunion, if you would, of, you know, everyone who had been in the music scene, everyone who had been part of that time when Mindle Beach Markets was doing its thing. And here we are all together in celebration, watching Matt and Mel get married. And while they're doing their vows, this dragonfly flies like right over to the crowd of maybe 200 seated people. It was quite a big wedding, and flies directly to the podium where they're standing in front of everybody and lands right on Mel's shoulder. Like she's in her beautiful wedding dress, her arms are bare, and this dragonfly just goes right over to them and lands right on her shoulder, like where everyone can see it, clearly framed against her skin, and stays there for the duration of their vows. What a special thing to happen. But then the real like mind blower is they finish their vows. They say, I do, I do. They go in for the kiss. And when they go in for the kiss, the dragonfly lifts off, flies, you know, not like, this is not like, oh, it's flying here, it just lifts off and flies directly over to Dan Sr., who's Daniel's father, and lands on his shoulder. As though to just tell everybody, hey, I'm DK, as a dragonfly.
Whoa. Yeah.
In case you didn't catch it the first time, I'm going to go land on my dad's shoulder. And I mean, there was an audible gasp in the crowd when this happened, because I think everyone subconsciously understood in that moment, this is DK coming to see the wedding. So, in the form of a dragonfly. How, I don't know. But similarly to the conjecture that I think we flirted with here, and I'll say again, like, I don't know how those orcas showed up at that moment. Mm-hmm. This tree falling is right on par with that same idea that, like, these biological systems and these technological systems, all of them are illusory, and none of them are as real as we think.
Yeah. Then, it's so interesting. I love that story so much, because you can just imagine a small being like a dragonfly having an interaction with perhaps DK that's like, would you do me the honor of letting me use your eyes for to actually go and see this, and feel it, or whatever the experience is, and the other being like, yep, here you go. I like to think of that happening too. The little creatures with the little eyes and the little noses, they sometimes, if a spirit asks in the right way, like, yeah, sure, you can go check in on your grandkids here. You know what I mean? And you tell that story, and I think, like, I bet you most people, if you get down and having a nice conversation with them, will have a story of oftentimes it'll be a little creature like a bird or a lizard or a dragonfly, hummingbird, that's kind of the coincidences of the visit, and even sometimes a little bird will visit and it's not acting like the normal way a bird's acting. It's like right there, like on someone's shoulder, straight up, completely not quote unquote normal behavior. And I mean, who doesn't have that experience and not feel goosebumps or at least have a grin on their face, you know?
I know that in many First Peoples mythologies, you know, the eagle is like the ascendant elder, and many animals are considered to basically just be relations, like truly and figuratively relations. Which, again, like if you think about Eastern mysticism and the idea of like cycles of rebirth, is it that? Is it more like what you're saying, where like a soul is chatting up a little creature and saying, can I hitchhike for a minute and can we, you know, can I use your eyes? I think is a really beautiful way to say it. I do know that the dragonfly landed on Dan Sr.'s shoulder, and in that moment he was sitting with his wife Bronya, this is DK's mom and dad, and both of them were inconsolably crying, you know. And the dragonfly remained on his shoulder for some time, 5-10 minutes, while he was crying. Man. Yeah. And dragonflies are not known for landing on people. They are not known for
that
flying.
Long, like no, not even landing on people. Yeah.
And when it landed on Mel's shoulder, it was like, hey, look at me. You can't miss me. Everyone is looking at these two people right now as they say their wedding vows. This is the focus of this entire crowd. And I'm going to like, also knowing DK, it's very in line with like how he was and who he is. Like of course he was going to show up at the key moment when all eyes were there and do something.
Timing.
Yeah. And, you know, okay, even if it is just coincidence, as we think about this whole set of stories we've shared with each other here today and with the audience, you know, then that's a lot of coincidences.
Right.
A lot of meaningful coincidences. We should be so lucky, I guess is my point, if it is just coincidence, you know.
Well, we should be so lucky, yeah, totally. I hear you share that part of the story too, of the parents crying inconsolably, as we can all imagine happening to us. And it makes me think of this other, you know, the teachings of the elders and these old things that have been passed down. We're so grateful to hear them. I have heard it said before that, you know, when someone's talking and your voice starts, you start to cry, your voice starts to waver, you can feel your eyes getting watery. In this case, you're openly crying. It's because the spirit is near, and it's a really good thing. You're telling a story about someone you love and you start cracking up about it. Like, I mean, like your voice cracking and your tears are flowing. It's because the spirit is near, and that's an amazing thing. What does it mean? Like the timing too of DK is like, how long was he waiting to pull that off? You know? Wow.
Yeah, right. And like, what does that mean about a departed soul's observer status over time and the nature of reality? Was he waiting around for 2.5 years for that moment, or did he already know it was going to take place and he just popped in at the
totally
moment?
Right? Is it a completely different frame of how we think about time once we're in that realm? Leaning towards probably, yeah.
There's this there's like someone I cannot remember who, but this concept is not mine, but the person was talking about time. This is probably from some other podcast I listened to, and they made this really interesting point, which I'll share here as we go to move along. They said, like, if you think about a soul as here to grow, like the job of being a soul is that you're here to experience things and to grow and to learn. In order for that to take place, you need to have time, because you need to have before the decision and you need to have after the decision. And so we make these choices which, ultimately is how we learn and how we grow, is through our choices. And without time, there is no before the choice and after the choice. So time is really critical for choices to unfold and to give us teachings. But once you've transitioned, the nature of the need for time as a function of learning is perhaps no longer as important. And maybe that means that time has different perceptions depending on how alive or quote unquote not alive you are at the moment. But again, like talking about how does our phone know that we're together? How did the orcas know that we're in the boat? How does, Laura know that everyone is together watching this TV? One of the big things that does come up is that there's something going on with time that we don't really have a good working experience of as humans living day to day, but that the other side has a different way of understanding it.
And that's probably almost comical to them. That's my thought. Like thinking of other experiences, almost comical to them.
Like you're describing, like if I was in your situation and I saw a TV freeze like that and then move on, it would be unforgettable. And I was at the wedding, and I will never forget, as soon as that dragonfly landed on Mel's shoulder, I just knew that's DK. I just knew right away. I didn't say, oh wow, look at that bug, that's so random. It was so intentional, the way that it flew over and landed on her and then moved over to his father, that for me anyway, I like to believe, like you said, or I like to think about it as a true visitation from DK from the other side. However that works, I have no idea, but the feeling in my heart when I was experiencing it was that is what was taking place. Blake, if you've got another 10, 15 minutes, just before I let you go here, would you be so kind as to tell me the story about this recent experience where you spent some time on the land? Because I know that there's a bit of tie-in with Laura there, and you told this amazing story about your visitation with the robin. I'm wondering if you could be so kind as to share this as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, James, for letting me tell this story. I will tell this story. I will tell bits of it because the whole story is quite a big one, that I will only tell to a few people, but these snippets that happened are significant events from my quest. It was last spring. I went out on the land to do a traditional 4 days of fasting on the land, and something I had been thinking about for a really long time. Traditionally, it's questing on the land traditionally happened to our ancestors when they were young people in their late teens, transitioning into quote manhood and quote womanhood. I never had a chance to do it when I was young, and the opportunity and the mindset for me had come, and so I did my first 4-day quest last spring. And the two parts of that story that I'll share with you really do have good tie-in today because they relate to small birds, and I believe other realms. So try to make it as short as I can, but not leave out details so that it makes more sense. But having no food and very, very little water for 4 days and 4 nights, plus kind of fasting and not necessarily fasting, but cleansing and cutting out sugars and cutting out a lot of other things out of my diet in advance of going on the land. All together, sort of, for whatever reason, came to this situation where I really could not sleep at night. So before we went on the land, we arrived at a place where we were supported by other people who were not necessarily fasting, but were helping support us. So there was 2 days of actually eating food and getting ready and picking our site on the land and having some small ceremonies and such. But each of those nights, I wasn't sleeping. So by the time I went out on the land for my first day and night, I hadn't slept for two days. And it continued to happen to me. And so one of the things that I started to just notice with relief almost was every morning. We all know that the birds make a lot of sound in the morning, especially in the springtime. There's this cacophony of birdsong that we all sort of know exists. But for me, it was the first time in my life to really be there multiple days in a row, right in the forest, to hear the very, very first bird that starts off the song. And in the case of where I was doing this on northern part of Vancouver Island on the west coast here, it was the robin. Every morning it would be like a curious, almost put a question mark at the end of their song, just like testing. And then usually within 10 seconds, there was a whole bunch of birds singing. And I was just starting to develop this real love for that moment of the morning. And it was making me smile. And it also meant that my night of sleeplessness was over and at least the sun would be coming up. And so on my second or third day on the land, there was a beam of sunshine actually came through the forest and kind of hit this one patch near to where I was. And it looked really appealing to just lay down in the sun. So I took a blanket over there and I laid down, and something about that moment in the middle of the day, in the middle of the sunshine, I was able to actually fall asleep. And when I woke up from my sleep, what I'll describe it as was I was laying on my back with my eyes closed, and I could feel the presence of someone laying beside me, basically hand across chest, leg across legs, head kind of nuzzled in neck. But I had enough knowing to know that it wasn't physically a real person was going to be there laying with me. It was this in-between feeling of, it felt so close to real, but my knowing brain knew that it probably wasn't physically a person there. And I had a strong knowing that it was Laura, this person from my past who I had loved and I, still carry love for. So I, in that moment, really just appreciated the feeling of it and tried not to move. And the emotion that I feel when I tell the story is good because it's good. It means the spirit of that person is near and is being remembered fondly in this story. So I did the thing we sometimes do when we're in a nap state where you just twitch your finger to like make sure it's still there, sort of thing, or wiggle your toe. And when I did that movement, I felt the exiting of this presence of this body who was, snuggling with me. And so as that feeling kind of withdrew, I opened my eyes, and when I opened my eyes, a hummingbird flew down, and it flew right above kind of my feet, about head high, just for a second, and then it flew back over to where I had my sleeping situation set up underneath a tree, and then, flew back to its bird's nest. And it was nesting nearby, the hummingbird specifically. I knew which one it was because I had passed it enough times to use the latrine during my quest. So when that happened, I had a knowing that that little bird was interacting at the very least with the spirit of someone I love who's in the other realm. And I had just had a visit of sorts. So that sat with me very special, and I actually had some sleep, which is amazing after you've not slept for many days. And so I continued with my quest, and I actually continued to not sleep. And so again, my most anticipated event was often just waiting for that first bird song, and it kept being the robin. And so I made it to the fourth and final day of my quest, and my final night was over, and I had awoken, and I was called back to finish the ceremony with a sweat lodge. So we did that with and had some broth, and I started to put food in my body, and in my mind and in my spirit, and I, like, just looking back, I know in that my quest wasn't fully over yet. Even though I was off the land and I'd had food again, it didn't feel over. So I stayed on the property for another day for transition before leaving to get into the real world, and I continued to have no sleep. And so on the very last night, last night on the land, after coming off of the fasting, I had probably the worst night of anxiety I had the whole almost 7-8 days had gone by at this point. I couldn't even close my eyes without even really almost seeing the word anxiety flash across. So I was having a really rough go of it, to the point of even having irrational thoughts like maybe I should just pack my tent up and leave in the middle of the night. Your logical brain is going, no, don't do that. But there's a part of your brain that's like, maybe I should. So I'm sitting there, and I have tools. I know I have songs I can sing. I know that I can get myself through this. So I use my tools. I sing a song that helps me. I even get out my little tiny rattle and I shake it a little bit, and soon I'm doing some other self-soothing things, like I'm moving my feet in my sleeping bag and like rubbing my shoulders and singing myself down, and soon I've completely self-soothed. I've even almost came up with a new song that really soothes me. And I'm sitting there, I'm feeling quite positive that I've taken these steps, and now I'm waiting for the first bird, and it's robin. And I smile because it's been with me now these 8 mornings, and I actually wake up and I go down to the river, and I have a dip in the waters, and I offer some prayers. I'm feeling great. I'm feeling really good. And so the only really thing left on the schedule is to wake up, have my breakfast, and then the other people who've quested on the land are going to share with each other. And then we're going to go home. And so as it happens, I'm the last one to share my story. And so we're sitting in a round building, and it has a fire pit in the middle, and above the fire pit is a metal catcher that turns in, like, it looks like an upside down trumpet. Basically, you can imagine the smoke goes up it and comes out the top as a chimney. And we've been sitting in this room for half of the day sharing our stories. And I'm at the end of my story. I'm where I was in this story 2 minutes ago. I'm telling everybody about my night of anxiety and my self-soothing. And I get to the part of the story where I say, and you know who it is who does the first song in the morning? And right when I say that, right when I'm at that exact point in the story, this robin flies out of the forest, lands on the chimney, and just belts out this song. And its voice is like magnified in this round room. And oh wow, we all looked at each other with such disbelief, and we laughed so, like, oh my goodness. It was like, as I tell the story now, I'm feeling strongly emotional about it, because it was like the timing of that, and the being who was the robin coming through to just match up to my story was too coincidental to be just a coincidence in my mind. So I hold that really close to my heart as a very important visit for me, and a very important sign of what I would say like solidarity coming through, and I hold that precious. So, thank you for hearing my story and asking me to share it, James. Felt good to revisit.
Well, Blake, certainly the thanks comes from me. I really do think you're just a beautiful man and one of my close friends for that reason. It's not easy to share emotions for anybody, and for men especially. And so I really do admire the way that you're able to connect with that side of yourself and bring value and meaning to this conversation from that place. Thanks, man. It really does mean a lot to me.
You're welcome, James. You're welcome.
Well, I'll tell you what, as we move away from this storytelling, this great storytelling here today, I'll just add, the thing that comes to mind for me here, which is often what comes to mind when I get together with you and we talk about this weird stuff, which is that sometimes I feel like reality is pretty challenging and pretty scary, and can often feel like you're kind of up against the world as an individual. And I'm sure that many, many people listening understand that feeling. But when I talk with you, I kind of feel like sometimes that reality has kind of got you, like giving you a hug, and that
yeah
there's much more like divinity and meaning to what is going on in our lives than we maybe understand at the time. And, that feeling of like being held by these departed loved ones, being that reality, whether that's the correct word for it or not, is listening to you, is an extremely powerful insight for everybody listening. It's not just me and Blake that reality is listening to. I do really think it's listening to all of us all the time, and that there's much more of an interface going on than just we are a human unit moving through some time and landscape. And it's much more like everything is kind of deeply illusory and deeply interconnected in ways that we're just beginning to understand, is how I feel. And I don't have any answers to what that exactly is, and I don't even know how it works. But the more I do this show and the more I have my own experiences associated with this show and listen to others, the more it just becomes increasingly undeniable that there's some inner workings there that is real as anything, maybe more real than anything, and is something that we should all know about and somehow pay honor to, or at least be aware of as we go about our lives, that there's something more there for real, and that there is an interaction, a conversation, a meaning to our lives, essentially. Yeah, and something changed there. Did your headphone change or something? I've lost the recording of maybe the last 5 minutes of that. Let me just try something here. Just a moment, please. So output is, that's weird. Okay. We should be okay again here. Just let me. Okay, I've got you back. Can you say something? So that's also weird. For the audience listening, That last little bit just totally was the victim of a computer glitch, which does not make any sense. I'm not touching the mouse, nothing. The things you just said to me were obviously just for me, because the input for audio for you, Blake, just switched from one audio input, which is this aggregate device, Fascinating Fae, that I used to record. And I couldn't see you recording anymore. And I was like, what's going on? And it had just switched over to my AirPod microphone for some reason.
All right. It was just meant for you and me then, I guess, those last 2 minutes or whatever. Cool.
Yeah, I think basically it just caught the last little bit that I said, and then not what you responded, but that's okay. This is obviously for a reason. But yeah, for the audience listening, yet again, my computer tends to do unbelievable things when I'm recording Fascinating Fae, and this would just be yet another example. But out of respect for the fact that I am trying to publish a podcast, let's just close it out here and now in this way. So, Blake, I ask everybody that comes on my show this same question, and I'll ask you this question as we go to leave here today. The question's pretty simple, but take your time in answering it if you feel so inclined. I just like to ask people, what do you think that fairies are?
Wow. Okay. What do I think fairies are? Yeah, I think fairies are some kind of earthbound, maybe not earthbound, maybe cosmic, but they're definitely here on Earth. Beings that are able to affect and be in at least 2 different realms. And I think fairies, are working in the natural world in a lot more ways than we can necessarily see with microscopes and science. If I say any more, I think I'm just going to ramble, man. I don't know if I've ever been asked that question, but that's what I'll say.
That's a great answer, and I'm in agreement with you that they're here. That's the part I definitely agree with.
That's awesome.
For one guest in particular, Katie, you might notice that this story from Blake also involves the robin and hummingbird, which was 2 birds that were really instrumental in her experience. And I do often ask the question on the show, when is a bird not a bird? Actually, just one quick thought comes to mind that I'll leave you with, Blake. I talked to this man named Eliezer. He's an Israeli man, like a teacher. And he had done a research on like similar kind of subject matter. And his like mom and dad were quite old, and his dad passed away. And his mom had a Filipino woman helping around the house. And one day the mom and the Filipino woman were sitting in the kitchen having a cup of tea. And all of a sudden they heard this noise in the living room, and they went to go look, and they have like a china hutch, like imagine like the kind of cupboard you keep your nice plates and dishes in. And this is it was a very important hutch to the husband. He had a lot of his like old pictures and stuff in this hutch on display. And they hear this noise, and they go into the living room, and in the hutch is a small sparrow.
Whoa.
Inside the hutch. No way for it to get in. There's no open door. There's no open window to this hutch. But all of a sudden there's a bird in there. No windows were open in the living room. Nothing. They were just sitting there, and all of a sudden there's a bird. And they opened the hutch. The bird hopped out. They opened the window. The bird flew away. And they, in Israeli sort of subculture, not that this is Judaism specifically, there's a real belief that birds are the souls of departed loved ones.
Aha. Okay, really?
Yeah. So I thought you might find that interesting as a parting thought. drawing that knowledge from, a previous guest, Eliezer. Thanks again, Eliezer, for that story. Blake, I'm going to say a few final things here as I go to let the podcast go, and then I always give my guests just the final word. So if you want to think about anything you might want to say to people listening, just meditate on that. Okay. And I'll do this last sort of housekeeping stuff here. So for everybody listening, you've been listening to Fascinating Fae. I'm your host, Jim. Thanks a lot for being here. If you are interested in supporting the show, you can find Fascinating Fae on all of the common socials at that name, Fascinating Fae. And the website is fascinatingfae.com, where you can send me a message if you would like to be on the show yourself. Other than that, I just want to remind everybody that this subject matter is totally fascinating, totally mystifying, and that if you do come on, you're really helping at least one other person who's listening with some understanding of what's going on in their own life. So please do consider it. There's a lot of value in sharing these stories for everybody. And with that said, I don't really have any more value to add, so I'll just say my last closing thing that I like to say, which is that on behalf of all of the human and non-human listeners tuning into Fascinating Fae tonight, a super big thanks to my friend Blake for coming on the show. Blake, thank you for being here. I really do appreciate it very much, man.
Oh, thanks, James. I really appreciate being here and talking about the other worlds that exist around us. And I hope that everybody who's making room for that is attending to it with all the hope and benevolence and respectful playfulness that is needed. And thanks everybody for listening. I really appreciate being able to share my stories and being heard. Thank you.
Found out today that I was born in the cold. Traded my boots for some sea legs. Built me a boat, but I felt so free, 'cause I will never die at sea. To the storm, to the wind and the rain, danced with the waves, they were giants. The sky grew dark and I felt so free, 'cause I will never die at sea. The ocean receives me. I'm cradled and safe. she's holding me easy. I'm right here in my place. Yeah, the ocean receives me. I'm cradled and safe. And she's holding me easy. I'm right here in my place. I'm right here in my place.